Okay, welcome, welcome, welcome. We have people joining us for our webinar, Stories of the Bay for Design by Rhode Island during this very special Design Week. We're going to get started in just a minute, as I see a lot of people are logging on right now. So let's get started with just an introduction and some acknowledgements. This panel, of course, is convened to talk about something that's very special to all of us here in Rhode Island, the Narragansett Bay. And as we were putting this panel together, it was very striking on how design really threaded all our stories together, whether that's architecture, art, science, research. And so we figured this was the perfect forum to talk about our work and share them and find those interconnections. And as circumstances happened, this event moved from Providence Fest or PVDFest over to Design Week. So I will get started with a few acknowledgements. It is part of Stories of the Bay. This panel is part of PVDFest Ideas. The PVDFest Ideas partners seek to deepen civic engagement by curating cultural programs and interpretive materials that provide relevant historical and cultural context for Providence's current challenges and opportunity. So this event wouldn't be possible without the support of our firm, KITE Architects. We're very proud to be sponsors, as well as the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities, who, despite the postponement of PVDFest, committed sponsorship dollars to the 2020 festival to help the City of Providence's Department of Art, Culture, and Tourism bring PVDFest ideas programming to the public. We'd also like to thank the Narragansett Bay Commission and Save the Bay for their support. Finally, a big thank you to CIC for sponsoring this event, which is being hosted from their space in Providence's Innovation and Design District, as you can see behind me along the beautiful Providence River. CIC's co-working facilities support entrepreneurs in changing the world through innovation, and their goal is to allow you to grow your business while they take care of the rest. To find out more about CIC or schedule a tour of their space, you can follow the link that Micah is just going to drop into the chat right now. So our format today is we will have three presentations, first from Deborah Spears-Moorhead, next from Albert Garcia, and then from Jen Bissonette and Stuart Copeland. And I will introduce each of them in turn. But before we go to our first speaker, Deborah Spears-Moorhead, she is going to be giving a land acknowledgement as a way to open our session today. Okay. Over to you, Debbie.
Booty Kisa. That means good day. My name's Deborah Spears-Moorhead. I'm a Seekonk Pokanoket Wampanoag, and I'm a descendant of Massasoit. So ever since time immemorial, as far back as we know of, my ancestors, the Narragansetts and the Wampanoags, have lived here on this land, now referred to as Providence, Rhode Island, New England. It is our belief that as Indigenous people, we belong to this land. For Indigenous people, our home is not a new world, it is in fact an old one. We have a history that expands back to the beginning of creation. The relationships between the people of this land is very complex and multi-dimensional. From the relationship we have with all of creation, we live in a traditional way of life. From these traditions, grounded in the homeland, we live a cultural way of life. Indigenous people all over the world develop their culture through their connection to their homelands. We are here for a short time, and we are merely borrowing the land from the ones who come in the future. We take care of the land for the next 7 generations to come. Indigenous people have a reciprocal relationship with the earth. That is, we are stewards to Mother Earth. We take care of her and she takes care of us. Our leaders, grandmothers, and grandfathers consistently share the oral traditional stories of our children that relate to our tribes and how the world began in relationship to the universe. These stories that they told bridge the information from one generation to the next, from the past to the future. They would explain where we came from and why we must respect all living things. These teachings would explain to the children where they would belong in their relationship to the universe. Thought and a person's word are sacred to us. Wampum belts were made to record words in history. Our culture is embedded in the homelands and in our language. When the tribes were telling our history, it could take up to 2 to 3 days. From our oral history comes the belief that the earth is a living thing. And as Trudy Lamb Richmond would say, an elder from the Scotticoke Nation, all societies have a particular way of viewing the world around them, and it reflects in their life ways and culture. Indigenous people believe in living in a communal way. The whole group works together for the betterment of the group. We are not an industrialized society. Besides a man's word, air, land, and water is also sacred to us. My ancestors' bones are buried in this land, and the ashes of my people are carried in the winds. My ancestors fished and drank in the same waters as we still do today. Because my ancestors protected the earth, and they were looking out for the next 7 generations, we can look back to the last 7 generations to know why the land, air, and water is like it is today. Our cultural way of life originates from the reverence of the creation of the resources that sustain us associated with living in this region. Oral traditions are embedded in the uniqueness of the homeland, landscapes and seascapes and waterways. Knowing the oral traditions of the lands, you know why certain land and the waterways look the way they do from the Wampanoag and Narragansett perspective. Knowing ahead of time of what is going to happen from season to season and year to year prevents us from living in chaos, which in turn makes us feel safe. The 4 predictable seasons of this region prepares us for changing weather and changing resources. The fresh water and ocean are home to so many different species, which are not all here year-round. The running of the heron and the return of the leaves let us know when it's time to plant. The moon and the tides tell us when it's time to fish, gather, hunt, and harvest. Wind and air pressure warns us of what we should be preparing for. Repeating behaviors of Thanksgiving harvest, teaching, celebrating, and storytelling develop in traditions and ceremonies. The beliefs, traditions, and ceremonies are our cultural way of life. When our Mother Earth is not respected, weather becomes unpredictable and human life is expendable. Like I said earlier, I'm a Seekonk Wampanoag. It was my ancestor Massasoit that invited Roger Williams to Seekonk to live amongst the Seekonk Pokanoket Wampanoag Nation in the summer of 1636. William moved to Providence, in Providence meaning the gift of God, across from the Seekonk River, where he was met by Canonicus and Mayatonome. The Seekonk River is the boundaries that made the Wampanoag and that separated the Wampanoag and Narragansett nations. It is my Wampanoag tribal ancestors that protected and sheltered the minister Roger Williams, who had challenged the Puritans' magistrates and defended Wampanoags. Williams believed that the Puritans were mistreating Wampanoags and unfairly taking their homelands. Williams condemned the English Royal Charter for sanctioning the taking of Wampanoag homelands. Williams was tried, found guilty, and banished from Massachusetts Bay Colony in Plymouth and Salem. They believed that Williams had a new and dangerous opinion, since he believed in freedom of religion. William fled the colonies in the dead of winter and was aided by the Wampanoag people in the spring of 1636. Williams and his followers settled at Seekonk Cove. Governor Edward Winslow of Plymouth requested that he move him and his settlement across the river. However, the East Bay portion of Rhode Island is Massasoit in the Wampanoag Nation homeland. It's not, so we are still part of Rhode Island, but not just Massachusetts. Williams never forget that it was Wampanoag and Narragansett that aided him and assisted him in the escape from Massachusetts. He respected them without romanticizing us. He was deeply interested in Native Americans. He preached and traded and visited. He learned and recorded our language. He had an understanding and appreciation for my ancestors, and he took controversial stands in defense of my ancestors' property and rights. He also defended the fact that the land in North America was already occupied, was not discovered by the English. Roger Williams founded Rhode Island as a place to practice religious freedom. It is no wonder Providence is well known for the arts and freedom of religion and expression. Thank you for acknowledging the Narragansett and Wampanoag people. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. That was an incredible way to open our session here, and so relevant. So I will just, as Debbie, as you want to get your presentation on screen, I'll just mention to the audience, Debbie is a conceptual artist, a historian, and a culture bearer for the Secaucus Wampanoag. So she will take the next 15 minutes or so and share some of her work with us.
Okay, I'm sharing this, share my screen. There we go. And it looks like this should be sharing, share. Are you seeing it?
We're seeing a portion of it.
Okay, go again. Let me try this again. Not my favorite part of sharing the screen.
Oh, perfect. We can see that. That looks great.
All right, so I am a conceptual artist, and what I do is paint a lot, mostly the portraits of Native American Eastern Woodland people, pretty much Narragansett and Wampanoag people. My family, my relatives, my tribe, and so I also, for a few years back, I started painting murals. I volunteered as a AmeriCorps volunteer for America, for national service. And that's where I worked with Monia, I think it's Monia Mohammed, and he taught the whole group in AmeriCorps how to do murals. So I've been asked to do land acknowledgement murals, but my first mural that I did about Native people was back in, I think, 2005. It's this screen you see here. It's at the Tamaquag Museum now. And this mural, the idea behind it was to teach the Native kids to learn the techniques of colonization. And the techniques of colonization are to divide and conquer, to not say your name, do not use your language, do not do all these things that make you healthy and wholesome. So each of the panels, tobacco, cedar, sage, and sweetgrass, represent a medicine to heal the people. We use them for ceremonies, for healing ceremonies. So that's the title of them. And then the outside borders were basket designs, Eastern Woodland basket designs. The circles on the second one, cedar, that's the 4 directions. That means that everyone is equal, from every ethnicity. And sage is to walk into moccasins, and sweetgrass is the storytellers. So each panel was to teach lessons in Native American culture to learn the techniques of colonization, and these lessons on the panels are the opposites of the techniques. So one technique of colonization is to not know yourself, to not know your history, Oh, I say too many times. I gotta stop right now. I just heard myself. So the first one is about reflection and to getting to know yourself, like by reading a book or maybe go meditating or going on a canoe or and playing a flute, going hunting, anything that you can do that you have time to yourself so that you know yourself and you know what your beliefs are, so that somebody can't turn your beliefs to something else because you're strong in your own convictions. So that one is east, and that's the sign of tobacco. The next one is cedar, and this one's about the culture and embracing the culture in the summertime. Cedar represents the summertime. Tobacco represents the beginning of life. Summertime is at the middle of life, and that's when you embrace your culture, you speak your language, you dance your prayers. So that's what this one's all about. And the next one is sage, and that's my Eleanor Dove, who lived to 100, and she was a sage. And this one's called "The Apples Don't Fall Far from the Tree." So she was a great role model. So the apples not falling from the that fall from the trees are all her children, and how they enjoy and embrace life, um, and pretty much the lesson in that one is to be a good role model for the next 7 generations. Then the last one is the about the storyteller, and that's my cousin Paula Dove Jennings. And Sweetgrass is winter, and it's about telling the stories and keeping the history together, and using your language. So I taught these techniques because in 2000, I think it was 2005, there was the raid on the Narragansett Nation, and it was really traumatizing for everybody. So I thought the children really were traumatized. So I knew that I had to do something for the next 7 generation, because their trauma would last and it would go from generation. We're still dealing with generational trauma, so I tried to stop that trauma right where it started at that melee with the Narragansetts and the state police trying to stop them from selling cigarettes. So the name of this one is Nunichum Napishkanash, which means our children, our future. And the Smithsonian gave me the funding to paint that. And so that was one of the first murals that I did. So I realized that I like to do murals in fours. Four is a sacred number, and 7 is a sacred number. I can't seem to get it to move. There it goes. The next one that I did, I was on vacation and I was asked to come back to Rhode Island and paint this mural. It's a land acknowledgement mural. It says, "Indigenous, we belong to this land since time immemorial, and we are still here." So it's just an acknowledgement to say that, we have never left. Most of us have this trauma about being in elementary school and being told that we didn't exist. So it made it a really difficult time for us to form a strong identity of ourselves, because every day I was being told that I was Wampanoag and Narragansett, and my mother would braid my hairs, and she would tell me that when she was braiding my hair, every braid was a prayer. So they gave us strength, in medicine, like we call that our medicine, in good medicine, to get through. But they weren't telling us. Well, I didn't get the whole full story. To me, it was all obscured of the history of the people here. So I ended up spending like most of my adulthood doing research and asking people about the history, until I finally finished and wrote a book about it. And through the process of writing the book, that's where I found the documentation that showed that we descend from Massasoit. My grandfather had a wooden chest that had all the documents in it, but nobody knew they were there because he died building a church when my mother was 5 years old, so she didn't know his history. But when the church gave me the wooden chest, that's when an anthropologist told me that where that genealogy ended, Massasoit's descendant had written another book, and hers ended where mine, well, they met. They both met, so that's where we had the proof, and there was no obscurity of who we were in regards to being Massasoit's people, because we were always called Anawan's people, Massasoit's people. And so in Narragansetts, so the Narragansetts and the Wampanoags, a lot of the Wampanoags lived with the Narragansetts because of the King Philip's War. They just incorporated us. So there's always been like a line where we're called Wampanoags. So in the federal government makes us try to decide which side to take. It's really hard to take that when you have a lot of different mixed ethnicities. So this one painting, they asked me to paint it on Cypress Street in Providence, and I had a month to do it because the person that started the mural backed out, I guess because it was really hard to paint. It was like 14 feet high and very long. It was like a block long. So uh, I had to put it together like in a month. So I just knew I could do it. So I used everything that I knew as an artist with my training. I have a master's in arts and cultural sustainability and a bachelor's in fine arts. So I just had the image projected onto the wall, and I got a couple of RISD students who helped me. One was on the projector, and then we just took a magic marker and put the drawing up. So that made it move quick. And from there, it was a month of painting, day and night. Well, mostly day. You couldn't paint in the night, but so I did that for. But the story behind this one is the way that the art can influence the environment is because while I was painting above the bridge, this is on a bridge, there was a group of, I don't know what you want to call them, adolescents who were smoking pot and drinking and throwing glass, and the glass was coming down on the land. And I was pretty aggravated because I was working there. And when I first got there, I was like, how do you want me to work in these conditions? There's glass all over the ground. So I started cleaning it up. And I'm a diabetic, so if I step on glass, it's a strong possibility that I could lose a foot or a leg. So I was pretty stern about, I didn't want that land to have any more glass on it. So one day I was painting and they were smoking pot and it was, you know, a lot. So I had my German Shepherd with me, and so my German Shepherd was barking, and we went up to the fence to see where the smell of the pot was coming from. And I said to the group, I said, listen, I'm getting a contact high down here. I was like, you think that you're like smoking and nobody knows it? I was like, probably the whole, street knows you're smoking up here. And they were like, are you the narcotics agent? Is that your dog? And I said, well, I could make him. I could make him if you, don't stop. And then I said, and who's throwing all this glass on this land? And they said, and I said, you guys are doing it, just fess up. And then they said, yeah. So I said, well, I'm a diabetic and I could, cut myself on this, and I really need the land to be, a lot cleaner for me to do this painting. And then I said, would you throw glass if your mother was down here painting? And they said, no, absolutely not. And then we started talking, and some said, well, I got Narragansett ancestry. I have Wampanoag. We started getting to know each other. And so I said, well, you have to think of the earth as your mother, and that, whatever you do to her, you're doing to your mother. And I said, you wouldn't do that to your mother. So they said, no. Okay, well, we really apologize. So then one time they were up there at a party, and somebody threw a paper plate down from the party, and I went up and I said to them, who did that? And they were all scared to death of me. These are the kind of kids, like, they're out there, you worry about whether they have guns and they have drugs, and they were afraid of me, but I'm used, like, as the mother kind of role, but I'm used to working with high-risk children, and I know, like, it's all usually a big front, and there's usually a scared person behind that big front. So I just speak to them person to person. So one of them admitted he threw the paper plate, and they all got down on him and said, "What's the matter with you? That's your mother down there." So ever since then, I think they keep. The last time that I went there, the land was pretty clean. They keep it pretty nice, and so that's how the environment keeps it clean. That's how putting a mural up and being part of the people that live there, just to talk to people is all you have to do. So, and this mural also makes them honor the past in the future. So it gave them some pride in their ancestry too. So this is Minnie Babcock. She's a Narragansett. And this lady was something Steele. I never got her name, who was Narragansett. Frank Nicholas, Pine Tree and Chief Sunset. And then they wanted some people from the present, so of course I put myself in there with my two cousins, Lee and Harry Edmonds. So people can, this is about the size of a human, so somebody can stand there and we can like hold them with us. People go there and have their picture taken right here. It's cool. So then the last one that I did was for the Providence, which was last year, 2019. I did both of them in 2019. So this one is about the Providence River, and it was commissioned by the Providence Preservation Society. And the commission was about this parcel called Parcel 1A, and it was the land bank on the Providence River. So I did Providence Preservation Society had already did a lot of research on the land, and there was a commercial company, like they were going to put up a hotel or something like that on the land, which would take away the access to the public to be able to get to the water. So my mural was to show the richness of the land and the heritage that was behind it, and also the richness in how Providence River sustains us. What has happened in the last 4 generations? Here I am again. I'm working with the 4 directions, east, west, south, and north. And so the first one is in the 1600s, and it shows how the land was pristine, and the Narragansett Nation lived there. And it's all about across the street. It's where Weybosset is, and Weybosset in native tongue means a place of crossing and trade. So this is where all the four directions of native people would go. The Wampanoags would go east, the Canadian Indians would go north, Narragansetts and Pequots would go back south. So I don't know who went west, and the West Indians. Right. They were the Mohawks. They would come down and trade. And this just explains all the bounty of the water in Providence River that went out to the ocean. And it was called Nasquetucket. That was the native word for that Providence River then. And it shows Roger Williams and Massasoit meeting. Then the next one is...
Okay. Thank you, Debbie. This is really great. We're nearing the end of our time. I think we'd all love to hear about a little bit about the rest of the panels, and then any other things that you'd like to show us.
Yep, the 1700s is the industrial time. 1800s is when it becomes a lot more industrial, and then to present day, it shows all the pollutants. So from the 1700s to it shows where the river, how the river sustained us, how we banked down the river. And then when you get to present day, it explains that there's so much we need to do to clean up the river. So because of COVID, I wasn't able to bring all this around, but it's going to be hanging at Providence City Hall in 2021, January. And after that, I would like to just bring it to all the different schools so I can teach with it. Great. On how to keep the land clean. That's it.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing your work and your story. There's a lot to unpack there, and it's clear that you have a really thoughtful approach to how your heritage and background fits into where we're headed in Providence generally.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate that you gave me this forum to speak at. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, you're not going anywhere. I want to remind our audience, if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A. After all our panelists have presented, we'll have a discussion period, and then we'll take audience questions. So if you can't find it, it's a little button on the bottom right of your screen. Okay, so next up we have Albert Garcia of KITE Architects, who is also my business partner and an avid environmentalist and a swimmer. And he's going to talk to you about a project that we did at KITE and also a very unique perspective on how architecture fits into the ecology and what is happening in modern times in the waterfront behind us.
Do I need to stop sharing my screen, or did you do that?
I think we did it, so you're all set for now.
Okay, thank you.
Is that coming through okay?
Yep, sure is.
Great. I'd love to maximize it here. Looking for a button.
Right.
Not the button. Sorry about that.
Okay, just go. I think the last Zoom level that you had, we could see everything. So if you just zoom to page level, that ought to be.
Zoom to page.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Great. Well, that was wonderful. I love hearing stories about how art has such a powerful ability to heal, and as we heal the land in turn heals us. You know, I'd like to talk. My stories relate to water quality and the overall sort of health of the bay, and I'd like to tell these stories from two different perspectives in parallel. One is as an architect working with the Narragansett Bay Commission, the agency that's responsible for treatment of wastewater in Greater Providence, and share some insights on a project that some work that we did, that KITE Architects did for their Fields Point wastewater treatment facility. And the second perspective is from a swimmer. I'm very thankful to have been able to swim in the bay for the past 20 years. And it is very much, for me, it's a place of renewal, mind, body, spirit. Enjoyed meeting some amazing people and made some amazing friendships over the year. And so in that 20 years, I've been able to witness a lot of changes to water quality over that time. And I've really come to appreciate the efforts of organizations like the Narragansett Bay Commission, Save the Bay, Clean Ocean Access, and seeing those direct positive that have come out of their work. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how my experience as a swimmer informed and inspired my work as an architect, and maybe how my work as swimmer architect has contributed in some small measure, I'd like to think, to the betterment of the bay. When it comes to detecting change in water quality in the bay, you can think of open water swimmers are kind of, we're kind of like a canary in the coal mine. Every time we swim, we're enveloped by the bay. We're in it. We hear it, feel it, smell it, taste it. So every time it rains, unfortunately, we become acutely aware of one of the greatest threats to the health of the bay and the quality of the water of the bay, and that's stormwater runoff. And as anybody, summer beachgoers know, when it rains, that often means beach closures, sheet flow coming across our neighborhoods, our roads, our lawns, rooftops, pick up anything and everything, and it makes its way and discharges into our stormwater system, or sometimes directly into the bay. And now, thankfully, the bay is quite large, 150 square miles, about 700 billion gallons at mid-tide. So you've got a pretty good amount of dilution that goes on there, but it has its limits. And the plot of this story thickens quite literally when we have heavy rain events. And that is because of what's known as a combined sewer. And many older cities like Providence, where the stormwater and sewage is combined in the same pipe that leads to treatment facilities. So, and this was common, especially turn of the century, long time before the EPA and the Clean Water Act, certainly. And basically, when it's dry, it's okay. Usually it works. You know, the water can and wastewater can make its way to a wastewater treatment facility, and there's enough capacity by design to deal with that. Now, when it rains, the game changes, and millions of gallons can get flushed into the system, overwhelm the capacity of a treatment facility, and that's when you have combined sewer overflow, and it's discharged, needs to be discharged directly into the bay. And the Narragansett Bay Commission has about 64 of these combined sewers in the district. So you can imagine, and before any of this, any improvements were made to the systems, in the 90s, there was over 2 billion gallons of untreated sewage that was being discharged into the bay. So in 2000, Narragansett Bay Commission developed a 20-year plan to bring Rhode Island into compliance with the Clean Water Act. And the first phase, there were 3 phases. First phase was probably one of the biggest tunnel projects that few people know. South of the Big Dig, this is the other huge tunnel project. And yes, that is a drill bit. It's designed to make a 3-mile tunnel from Providence to the Fields Point wastewater treatment facility. And the key component of this was a 60 million gallon chamber that's like a holding tank that allows the plant to catch up with the added capacity or the added load from a big rain event. So over in 2008, shortly after that, I can say as a swimmer, started to feel the effects of this, the CSO project. And, you know, when I started, you know, and KITE started working, I basically had been swimming now for 8 years in the bay, you know, dealing with, you know, all the storm water, and, you know, we just, you know, I was going on with our business, swimming in the bay. 2008 and beyond, we started to feel that difference. And coincidentally, that's when I started working with the Narragansett Bay on their Fields Point facility, which is a 60-acre wastewater treatment facility just south of the Port of Providence. It's a huge facility with 200 million gallon capacity. It's a massive piece of infrastructure. And I have to say that my experiences in the Bay, and as things started to really, it just inspired the work that we began with the Bay Commission with a master plan that identified a new operations building as sort of the first phase for the project. And as many infrastructure projects do, at first it was very much driven by pragmatic, sort of functionally driven solutions. And this was the operations building was a very small part of a much larger project, a $100 million project to improve plant process. So this was kind of a, I wouldn't say a side note, but it was definitely not the big, you know, big projects that they were taking on. The health of the bay and what they were doing at the core was the majority of the scope. But so this building was a control center for monitoring, directing activities on site, plant process, administrative offices, a locker room, things of, you know, lunchroom, plant support, you you know, for the staff. And to say what I'm most proud of with this project is how the thinking behind it evolved. It quite literally evolved in the early stages of planning and design into this collective realization for NBC staff and engineers, administrators, and the entire design and engineering team that the design for this building had the potential and maybe perhaps the responsibility to be a lot more than just a container of specialized equipment for the control room, or just a locker room and a lunchroom. And what it became was, and everyone was inspired by it, was this notion that it could become this front door for the plant and really embody the spirit of the core mission of the NBC to protect the health of the Bay, and also bring in an educational public outreach support that had largely disappeared from this plant at post 9/11 due to security issues. So this project kind of brought that back, as a way of reaching out to the community. And the building itself, in a lot of ways, tells a story about the life of water, and that's what it became. And we worked very closely with the NBC and Ron Henderson and LPLA Architects, landscape architects, and we created a building that could act as kind of a teaching tool, or a way to demonstrate best practices for stormwater management. How does water move across the site? We used the rooftops, the drainage systems, a series of green roofs that discharge into rain gardens that then flow out into porous surfaces that then allow the water to recharge and not get ejected into the bay. And before we started the project, this is part of Providence that, if you're familiar with it, it's a sea of asphalt. It's just dominated by heavy industrial. It's all along the Allens Ave, Thurber's. It's pretty inhospitable for humans. And so this was a way of also creating and recognizing the need to create a more human-centered and human-friendly place, because that's what the building was about. It was about housing people working the plant. So we worked with bringing in native plant, coastal plant communities as part of the landscape, and naturally drought-resistant plants, low water usage, to really kind of inspire that and make kind of a green oasis in this the sea of asphalt. And we had a lot of fun. We really did, with also diverting waste from the landfills, our surrounding landfills. So any material that was being demolished on site, obsolete tanks and structures, pavement, was either crushed for reuse as porous pavement, or cut into planks and used as decorative elements out in the out on the site. So it was a great project. I think everybody was really proud of what we all achieved, and I think it had to do with just taking a step back and saying, well, what is this project all about? And let's make it about water, and let's really make it about showing what can be done and done well to protect the life of the bay, and really to sort of stem the risks and danger of uncontrolled stormwater drainage. So I'd like to share one more story, if I might. So it has to do with a recent discovery that I made while night swimming. So we're going to shift to the nighttime, and that's my daughter. We went out for a swim, and this is we learned about what it's like to swim with bioluminescent ctenoforms, and I would spell it for you if I could, but they're comb jellies. They're also known as comb jellyfish. And so when you swim at night, very dark sky, what happens when you disrupt the water, you actually unleash this kind of this waves of bioluminescence. It's like a storm of fireflies that come off your fingertips, sort of like sparks flying. It is the most unearthly and ethereal kind of scene, and you're just out there, and my daughter was just completely blown away. And of course, as a photographer, I was like, I have to show people what this is about. And thankfully my daughter was there. She's very very talented swimmer and artist as well, and she said, Dad, you just have to experience it. You just have to be in the moment. Some things you just can't capture. And I was like, right. But I listened at the time, but then we had to do a little, the iPhone sketch was the best we could come up with for, you know, capturing the moment. But so what are these things? This is a new experience for me. 20 years of swimming in the Bay, never happened before. So it begged the question for me, what was happening here? It was amazing, but it also, you know, could this be some kind of, are we witnessing a shift in the ecosystem? Are we causing, you know, these blooms of jellyfish to suddenly occur? And some of you may have seen this, but earlier in September, there was an article that was written on this very phenomenon, and Todd McLeish from the Eco Rhode Island News wrote a great article about the research that URI Oceanography, the work of Barbara Sullivan Watts, they've been collecting data since 1972, so almost 50 years of data and water collection from specific place in the Bay. And they've been monitoring these kind of blooms from year to year. And there's definitely a trend with global warming. Higher temperatures in the Bay is the longer season for reproduction. There's, you know, basically earlier in the spring and later in the fall. So it explains, you know, the prevalence. And it's unclear what the impact long-term is going to be. And I don't think anybody completely knows right now. And I think, but comb jellyfish are voracious consumers of zooplankton. So at that, you know, in terms of the food chain, they're in direct competition with fish larvae. So any disruption, that's going to disrupt or put some kind of stress on our fisheries. We know that. And so this is happening in real time. And so it's happened before. It's happened in Europe, beginning in the Baltic Sea in the 80s. There were similar increases in comb jellies. Now that, in combination with overfishing and pollution, has pretty much caused a collapse of fisheries throughout this region. And this for me hit a lot closer to home, because I live right close by to 100 Acre Cove, a short walk away from Bullock's Cove. Both have had experienced some pretty big fish kills this summer. Could it be related? Possibly, quite likely. So time will tell, and the quality of research, collection of data, and corrective action at the right time is really what this spoke to me about the relevance, you know, today. So just an added thought, you know, each time I return to the Bay, whether that's driving past 100 Acre Cove or on my way into Providence or going for a swim or paddle or sail, it's a kind of awakening for me every time, and it is a gift to be able to experience that. And what it reminds is a constant reminder to keep our eyes open, you know, to what we're seeing and what's happening around us in the environment, and constantly an awareness of how we are shaping and are shaped by the natural environment and the built environment around us. And it never ceases to sort of inspire a sense of humility as well, in our efforts of understanding these really complex systems, and the incredible the need to have events like today's and the discussions that we're having today, to share our knowledge, our data, and our experiences to help continue to fuel that creative engine that can solve and understand these really complex systems and find our place and how we can be a part of it sustainably and preserve it for many, many, many futures to come. So I know we're probably short for time, and my partner is always very patient with me. But so I'm gonna turn it over.
Thank you so much. We are right, we're reaching our end of our time here, but I think that was a really fascinating way to connect architecture and the things we do as designers to, you know, our experiences out in the world. And, you know, I think that design, you know, is really one of those all-encompassing disciplines. So we'll come back to you as part of our Q&A session. But thank you, Albert. That was great. So our next panelist, that we'll move to, we have a pair of panelists who are split their time. We have Jennifer Bissonnette, who's the interim director of the RISD Nature Lab, and Stuart Copeland, who is a faculty at RISD and a researcher with the Nature Lab. So we'll turn it over to them.
So thank you so much. This is a wonderful panel to be a part of. Thank you to Christine and Micah for organizing it and for KITE Architects for supporting it. So I am the interim director of the Edna Lawrence Nature Lab at RISD, as Christine just said, and some of you may be familiar with our building. It's that funny one that goes over the bus tunnel at the foot of College Hill. And if you've walked on Waterman Street and looked into our downstairs windows, you might have seen this new space that we've created, the Biodesign Makerspace. And in fact, Albert, many times, if you can see back here with the aquaria that we have, many times we have comb jellies back there, which are equally inspiring in the daylight. They still have wonderful illuminating qualities on their combs. So this space is really all about bringing the bay to light. So the tabletops have rivers from the Narragansett Bay watershed engraved into the top of them, and students engage in making here surrounded by, you know, Phragmites is an invasive species that was used to make the lampshades above them. We've got native species of algae up on the wall, and then the tanks themselves that are filled with vertebrate and invertebrate creatures in the bay. And this is really about, you know, we think a lot about what artists and designers can bring to the health of the bay. And for us, it starts with awareness, because until this is sort of daylighted for you, this system that you are a part of, it's not as easy to care, and it's not as easy to let this inform your work. So one of the centerpieces of the room are these 250-gallon saltwater tanks. And we do go out with students. We go out collecting. In a typical year, we would have just recently come back with our species, and we go down to Jamestown. We collect some of those tropical migrants that come up on currents that drop tropical fish off into the bay. And then the students themselves take them, the organisms back to the bay, put them in the tanks, and they really curate a space for them. They create an aquascape for them, and then they're responsible for taking care of them throughout the year as well. Down the hall from our Biodesign Makerspace, we have an imaging lab that allows artists and designers to get a deeper look into the natural world. So in addition to daylighting what's out there, when you look out at the water, you might not be aware of what's below the surface. You may not be aware of the incredible color and pattern and forms and structures that there are to be inspired by in the natural world without using some of these tools of science to investigate. So in addition to creating this inspiring space to just visually explore, we actually do partner with scientific institutions from around the state. And there's a wonderful program sponsored by the National Science Foundation. It's called the Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. And RISD is one of 8 or 9 institutions around the Bay. It changes from year to year who's involved. And we get funding from them to run investigations together with our partner scientists and seeing what can happen in that really interesting space between art, design, and science. So one of the explorations led to this studio, for example. It's called Plankton Portraits, and it was run by Cynthia Beth Rubin. And so there were students that were using our imaging equipment to look at the plankton in the bay, look at these incredible creatures that we share our world with, that unless you had this kind of window, you'd have no idea because they're microscopic. And this is a zooplankton here. It's actually a larval form. But the phytoplankton, which are the tiny little plants, are all of that is like the foundation of the bay health. It's the foundation of the bay ecosystem. And again, you would never see it unless it was brought to light like this. So this is an installation that they did that was a fine arts installation, but it used augmented reality to be able to query those pieces of art and find out about the species that inspired them and their role in the ecosystem. Designers at RISD also engage actively in habitat restoration around the bay. So this is a project that was created, again, funded by NSF in our landscape architecture department. And usually people think of landscape architects as dealing with the land, not the water side of things. But the reality of our state is that so much of our coastline has been impacted by humans, both building right up to the edge and then our maritime activities and all the things that we've done to make it a great shipping port and make it a great fishing area. And we've lost a lot of the species that we had in the bay, and we've lost a lot of the structure that we had in the bay. And so this was working with designers to create habitat that would mimic some of the natural reefs that would be there along the coast. And so these were deployed out at Fox Point, and they're still out there, and they get checked from time to time, and they are doing what they are supposed to be doing, where other organisms are then aggregating onto the structures that were built and creating a really complex habitat in that near coastal area. Artists and designers are also brought forward for data visualization. So this was a project that looked at sea level rise due to climate change. And what they were really getting at with this exploration was how does the way that we show the science impact how people respond to it? And, as we all know, we're in a time of science skepticism. And so this becomes a really important question, right? Like, how do you get people to look at the data as it's presented and have it really resonate enough with them that it changes their behaviors? And this leads me to one of the big pieces that we work on at the lab. It's called data narratives. And Deborah, you spoke so eloquently about the history of your people and the relationships of the land and this reciprocal relationship, and also about the importance of stories, right, in explaining like our place and our connectivity. And I think that's something that we really resonate with about, as human beings, stories are what is placemaking in the world, right? Like that's how we know who we are and where we are, and what's important is because it was told to us through stories. So what we're trying to do with this work is look at the data that's coming out of area scientific institutions and find ways to create meaning from that and find the stories that really resonate with people. So one of the projects on this that I really like, this was actually the work of 2 undergraduate students. It's a website and it's called Dive in the Ocean State. And it was geared towards a K-5 crowd. And there were these series of innovative they're kind of like posters, but they also have this little water droplet that spins around, and they were put up all around the state. And the notion was that kids could go either virtually or with their parents, they could kind of collect them all and go to these different sites around the bay where they would be led into an exploration of the area ecosystem. So this is, for example, looking at some of the different plants that would be native to a salt marsh. So the students could actually go there and they could, use their iPhone or their iPad and actually like look at what they were seeing and compare it up against what they were being told about what they would see on this website. And then of course, because it's RISD and because we realize that there's something that happens to the human spirit when you interact in a creative way with what you're seeing and what you're experiencing, each of these sites then had an aspect of making to it, where there was some project that you could make so you could internalize what you were learning and make it your own. Plankton are really a great foundation of a lot of the stuff that we do at the lab, partly because they're the foundation of the ecosystem of the Bay, as I've mentioned before, and partly because they're just, I think they're really, they capture people's imagination, right? Like they look so either beautiful or alien, but they don't look like things that are part of our everyday life, but they are. So one of the projects that we worked on, Albert mentioned those long-term data sets. So this is actually a way of graphically showing, this only goes from 99 till now, but it actually, oh, it looks like it's paused. So this grid is a, oops. This grid is actually a, all right, it's not gonna work, but it's a grid of different species of plankton in the bay, and it's called phytoplankton fireworks because you can see over time like which species are becoming more abundant. And that, of course, is really important in figuring out like what are the effects that we're having on the bay. If these things are so tiny and we're not looking for them or we're not noticing them, we won't notice the changes as well. Maybe this one will work. So, and now we're starting to move into a sphere with our work at the Nature Lab where instead of just taking the data from the scientists and figuring out ways to interpret it through art and design to communicate it, it's actually working with the scientists and creating a pathway for them to have this visual design thinking about their research itself. And so that leads them to be able to see it in new and novel ways in terms of how they can communicate it, and also gives them insight maybe into the data that they're creating. So this is a sonification. I've turned the sound off because it never works well over Zoom, but it's also a visual about the changes that are being seen in temperature at these buoys around the bay. Another project that is coming out of this work, this was the work of Kevin Rosa, and he was really interested in microplastics and their fate in the bay. And so he's created a model to sort of say, where are these things going to go, or where have these things already gone? And you know, we have all these wonderful abilities to like test the water and to see how many microplastics are found in what place and be able to create these models of it. But I hope you can see from this that, and I hope you agree, that this is a really engaging way to be able to show it, right? It's almost mesmerizing watching this arm that's drawing the path of all of these drifters through the bay. And you can see it's starting to create the outline of the land itself, which speaks to the fact that they're going to be everywhere, right? They're completely taking up the entire bay ultimately. And so, you know, this is the work that we're doing that is really trying to look into the data, make them engaging in a way that makes people curious, because hopefully it extends from that sense of wonder. You get empathy for the organisms that are out there in the bay that we're sharing this incredible ocean state with. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Stuart Copeland, who's going to talk about the big project that we're working on at the lab right now that's called the Illuminated Bay.
Hi, hope you guys can hear me and my screen's working okay.
Yep, sure is.
My name is Stuart Copeland. I'm a researcher at Nature Lab and a faculty member at RISD. I'm here to talk about one project in particular. It's called the Illuminated Bay. So a lot of my research at the lab has to do with visualization projects associated with RICAIM researchers. RICAIM stands for the Rhode Island Consortium for Assessment, Innovation, and Modeling. It's a network of scientists and researchers from various fields across 8 institutions who are all studying the Narragansett Bay. So at the lab, my colleague Georgia Rhodes and I help scientists visualize their work to better share the research with the public. We do a lot of work with engineers from Brown University who are building the Ocean State Ocean Model, which is a computational model of the bay that runs on a supercomputer and can simulate all kinds of complex physical dynamics and environmental conditions. The long-term goal is to build a forecast and prediction system, which is crazy. So one day you might be able to use a computer simulation to predict where harmful algal blooms might occur, or which area of the bay might be most impacted by climate change, etc. So this is an amazing project, but the visuals that come out of the OSAM, they tend to look like this. So this is just one moment in a time series simulation of kinetic energy in the bay. And you'll notice that it's static, it's a still image, and also there's no land. So this visual is fine for scientific analysis, but doesn't really cut it when it comes to general communication or outreach. So we started to wonder if we could build a visual system that could serve as both a scientific tool for analysis as well as a resource for community outreach and engagement. And we wanted to create a platform for storytelling that could be mobile and accessible, so it could be used in the lab or deployed to public events or schools. And also it had to look awesome. So we outlined all these objectives into our grant proposal, which had this really kind of clumsy name: large-scale projection mapping is a collaborative platform for communication and discourse using oceanographic data for physical modeling in Narragansett Bay. But we just like to call it the Illuminated Bay. And it got funded, yay. But then we had to figure out how we're going to build this thing. And in order to spatialize this data, we needed to build a 3D model of the bay. And so we begin by defining our area of study, in which our case is a 40 by 60 kilometer rectangle, which is approximately about 900 square miles. And from there, using publicly accessible data from USGS, NOAA, as well as the Department of Environmental Management from Rhode Island and Massachusetts, we created a single model that included both the topography and bathymetry. Using a number of programs, including QGIS and Accutrans, Rhinoceros, we're able to create a single polygonal mesh. And here it is with contour lines, just to kind of articulate how enormous it is as far as like a 3D model goes. There's a vertex coordinate placed every 10 meters. So we ended up with a watertight 3D model that has about 37 million faces. After we create the physical model from this virtual model, we want to project data onto it. And this is a process called projection mapping, where you deform your projected image to correctly align with a three-dimensional surface. We ran some tests on a small scale print of the bay model just to see how it looked. And we were really happy with the results. And this is a 12-inch by 20-inch print, but our final model is 3 times the size. It's 40 inches by 60 inches. On the left, you can see the projection plane like at its actual size. And on the right, you see a 5-inch square section of the model printed to the final scale with the projection warp to match the surface contours. Another big part of what we needed to do after we build this model and have this projection thing is to have animations to run on it. So we've worked really hard to develop a pipeline between the raw data of the computational model to professional video editing software. So here's an example of the difference between the two. You can see on the left a composite video of drifter paths from the OSAM model, but on the right you can see how we take those trajectories and align them to a geographically accurate map projections, and we can animate those paths over time. Once we got this data into After Effects, you can add other base maps or relevant information, and we can adjust the vector graphics and their appearance without having to rerun the simulations on the supercomputer. From there, we get into fabrication, which is where we are currently in our building process. We tested 2 different types. On the left, you see a 3D model done with PLA printing, and on the right is SLA, or stereolithography, which is done using resin. And although we love the resin prints and they're incredibly detailed and beautiful, they have subtle variations from print to print, and the process is very time consuming, and the resin was cost prohibitive. So we settled on CNCing our model, and that's what we're currently doing right now, CNCing our whole model from a machine that we put together and assembled that actually runs in our lab. So it's also kind of exciting to get to do it all in-house. But all this stuff has to get combined into a single structure. What we're trying to do here is build this mobile rolling platform for visualization that can be used in lots of different places. And so we had to sketch out what this might look like. And here's a little bit of a closer look, at least into the guts. You have this short throw 4K projector built inside of this unit. And these 2 circles that are on either side, those are additional monitors that are being mounted in that can act as legends or have other videos that can play along while this projection mapped data is being projected onto the model itself, which is on the base. A lot of this has to do or plays into spatializing the data, which is the most important part. It's one thing to tell you what data means, but when we see the data in 3 dimensions, it's right there. We allow anyone who comes up to it, if it's a scientist or just a regular person who happens to stumble upon it, we get enough information that we can engage in this kind of in this scientific analysis, right? It's all there for all of us to interact with. And COVID has certainly been a setback as far as our project goes, but we're all on track as far as our production schedule. And so hopefully by next summer, you're going to see this thing rolling around. We want to have it deployed at events like you might say Water Fire or PVDFest, so that anyone can come up and engage and interact with this really amazing research that's going on and connect with the Narragansett Bay in a different way. Right? This is a lot of people have been helping out with it. So just to acknowledge all their hard work. And thank you so much for letting us kind of talk about it here in this talk. And that's it for me.
Great. Well, gosh, it's so fascinating. This is a really remarkable panel. I mean, my mind is racing with all the different kind of stories and lessons learned and connections, even though each of your work is coming from a different place. It's just so interesting to see how these stories wrap through every single one of them. So we have about 15 minutes left in our Q&A. So again, any attendees, feel free to ask a question in the Q&A. But I have a few that I can kick off some discussion with. First, maybe we can just go through each panelist in turn, and if you could just share one thing that really struck you from another one of the panelists' presentations. You know, either that positive or negative, or something that you might think about in your own work. You know, well, let's go through everybody in turn, starting with Deborah Spears-Moorhead. And you know, if there's anything that you care to share from what you heard today, then we'll go to Albert and then Jen and Stuart.
No questions.
No questions? Okay, we'll give you a pass. Albert, anything about plankton you want to say?
Well, yeah, I was just saying, now I really fascinated. I was really fascinated now with the plankton. I think it's as designers, I think when we come at different conditions, different projects, and we have, you know, sort of an intuitive sense sometimes where how we might take part and insert the design process and what's happening around us. And some of the things that when we're doing that early research, you know, a project like Narragansett Bay Commission, we knew that you know, we wanted to track water movement through, and quantifying it and then giving an expression to it in a meaningful way is one of the challenges to you know, to sort of bring that out, you know, things that are invisible, things that are hard to see, like, you know, microscopic plankton, zooplankton, and up the chain. And, you know, those are just seeing some of the modeling as well that Stuart just showed, that graphic of the spaghetti string that's starting to carve its way through the bay and find these different trajectories, and the way things start to overlay on one another. It's just fascinating to find tools that can help us see things in different ways, and just to start to give some kind of manifestation that we can then say, okay, well, this is something that we can use to start shaping, you know, our built environment, or how we're going to change something for the better. So it's just been fascinating to see your work, and it's so many things are working in parallel, and it's uncanny that we were drawn to the bioluminescence, but you know, there is something to connecting with those organisms that are all around us in the bay, and then, you know, dealing with microplastics, these other things that are floating around the bay. And so there's these ecosystems that are there for millennia, and then there's these other ecosystems that we've created, and they're making sense of that is just, that's really quite a challenge. It's an honor to see your work, and so thank you.
So one of the things that I was struck by with all of us is I feel like, you know, there's a way of being human that's really visual and visceral, right? That makes things matter to us, right? So, you know, I want to go and find your murals, Deborah, because I think that that would be so powerful. And I know that having them on the screen doesn't do them justice, right? That it's those human-sized people that you can then go stand and be held by. That's a visceral experience. Or Albert, you swimming in the water obviously makes you care so deeply about it because you're immersed in it, literally. But also, you know, this building that is like proof of concept that you can create things that work with the system. All you have to do is, well, all you have to do, the first step is to become aware of that system that you're engaging with, right? So that you mindfully create thinking about that whole system that you are a part of. And so, I mean, that's something that we try so hard at the lab to do, is to even though it's challenging, Albert, I think it's what has to happen. And whether it happens because we're taking, you know, this scientific approach of like really understanding the pieces and parts so that we understand like what our impact is on this, that, or the other. Or if we come, Deborah, from like a point of reverence, right? Where we don't even take that step, hopefully, until we know and we feel, you know, in our bones that what we're doing, because it comes out of a place of connectedness and thinking about all the other creatures that we're connected with and the next 7 generations of people to come after us, that's where like good choices come from, right? It's that really really whole understanding of the system that we're embedded in. And I guess I would just say, even though it's super challenging, I think that that's really the only way to overcome some of the problems that we've already created and to avoid creating more of them in the future as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that, you know, that we all have unique experiences of the Bay, and when it comes to kind of knowledge of a topic, it's not all just formally housed in institutions, right? Like everyone's unique experience with it, there's knowledge to be gained there, and there's insights to be shared. And so thinking about more dynamic systems for communicating these things that are also democratic, and how that knowledge and information is shared. If it comes from an oral tradition, or if it comes from a supercomputer, or if it comes from night swimming or a scanning electron microscope, like all these things can be composited into our understanding, right? And to think about ways that we can have some kind of a more porous exchange in our insights and understandings in the way that we share these things.
Great, thank you. I'll share. I was really struck by, after hearing the really powerful story of Deborah, like teaching these young boys to respect the earth, respect their mother. Then we go right into the industrialized society, dumping the raw sewage right into the bay. And it's a problem that we have to pour billions, hundreds of billions of dollars into. And I think it really begs the point that it's so much more expensive and costly and to undo a mistake than it is to just simply avoid that mistake to begin with. And I think that it's sometimes these juxtapositions of people are really helping to illuminate those points that maybe we missed. I want to go to some audience questions we have in the Q&A. The first question is for Deborah. Greg Means asks, are there any locations in Rhode Island that are particularly ripe for a land acknowledgement mural that doesn't have one yet? Or any places that you're hoping to work soon?
Well, I'm working with Peacedale, a place called the Collective right now, and that's going to be a mural that has a land acknowledgement portion, and it's also going to show the diversity of the area. But what I would like to put one up in East Providence, where they're putting up they're starting a place called the Weechamoychet Square. I think it's already been there. And that would include the Native people in our history from that area. It's such a rich history, and so I like working with the people that are making the cultural tourism's corridors. And then, you know, when they enter, they know they're entering into the homeland of the indigenous people that have been here for so long, and this is our place in the universe, and we know how significant we are because of the stories we were told. And also, you know, when the scientists and the indigenous people work together, it's such a great dynamic, because we're learning from the scientists and they're learning from us the things that we've been taught through oral tradition. So, you know, when someone is looking at a piece of land in Rhode Island or Tiverton or a place like that, the scientists may be looking at it for the data and, you know, whatever the chemistry of it is, but we're looking at it as one of our creation story. Oh, that's where Moshe dropped some mud and it fell down, or that's where Moshe threw his wife and that's the hip of her, or that's the long hair of the, you know, we have so many different perspectives of looking at things that if we put them together, we're just going to learn quicker, and it's going to be a wider understanding. So I think that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. That's wonderful. We have another question, and I will throw this out to whomever would like to take it, but I'm particularly thinking of our guests from RISD, Manuel Cordero. I'd like to thank everybody, and acknowledging the power of the cross-disciplinary work with multiple partners. So Manuel points out that everyone brings an openness to recognizing and leveraging the expertise of others. What suggestions do you have for others, including young designers looking to work at these scales and in collaborations? And I guess I'll look to, oh, I think you're muted, Debbie. Maybe Jen or Stuart, would you like to take that question first, since you do work with young designers all the time?
Yeah, so you know, it's interesting because I think that just the fact that a young designer would have a willingness is really important. And we talk about this notion of transdisciplinary inquiry, which is not interdisciplinary. It's a way of inquiring that doesn't privilege one way of knowing above another. And so whether you're, you know, working with indigenous peoples or working with people in, you know, westernized stovepipe of like, I'm a designer, I'm a scientist, it's really a way of relating to other people that decentralizes your own way of knowing and allows you to come to a more full understanding of the problem at hand. And so, you know, we've been fortunate to work with scientists around the state, but I will also say that I think, you know, it's a building of capacity too, like, because we're not taught this in our schools, you know, you maybe have never even heard the word transdisciplinary before, that having this skill set and having this way of approaching a problem leads to such amazing different things that can happen for outcomes than if you stayed in your own discipline. But it's a process that everybody at the table sort of needs to become aware of. And so I guess at a first pass, I would suggest that you understand a little bit about, there's a huge body of work on what it means to become a transdisciplinary individual, and try to hone those qualities in yourself, and then reach out to others whose disciplines are of interest to you. I mean, usually I find that a lot of people are interested in talking about what they do and how it can inform the project that you're working on, whether or not they're able to sort of meet you in a true transdisciplinary way. At least it's a start to get that sort of information into your project.
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of my background's in documentary film, and a lot of how I work is influenced by that. And to make a documentary film, you don't have to be an expert in your topic. You go to experts and you ask them, you know, what they know. And what I found is that people who love things love to share what they love. And so just being honest and being sincere and being a good listener and reach out. I think that's something also too, that people think that they need some kind of secret password in order to access someone's insider, just reach out to them. Like Google them, get an email address, or go find them and just ask them.
Right, that's terrific advice. I know, you know, as architects that we, one of the delights of our job is that we are always learning about other people's worlds. You know, whether that is, you know, for a simple project and just learning about the client in their home, or whether it is like the scientists at the Narragansett Bay Commission or other people. It's that questioning aspect of design and art that I think makes it naturally easier to be interdisciplinary than so many other fields.
It's the to leverage everyone's sort of the collective, the strength of the collective. I think you know, when we're working, especially in infrastructure, these are projects that have a cast of hundreds of people over a long period of time, and we're talking about with a CSO project that's 20 years plus in the making. So it requires, you know, willingness to participate in this, something that is much greater than you know, the individual effort, and it requires a lot of patience among the team as well to take the moment, take that time to understand the different points of view. And not be afraid to insert yourself in conversations that may not have included your point of view, and you know, or you may feel like you're not. And I'm speaking to the young designers, that you may not feel like you have a lot of expertise in, say, you know, electromagnetic, you know, forces or something, if you're working for an electrical company, or but you can come at it with a perspective that is truly your own, and really help people see things in a very different way. And so you just have to be open to learning all the time, and sort of not give up to that, you know, give up that thirst to learn more, and the desire to learn more, and to be part of that, the collective. So that's a great question.
Right, thank you. So we're getting to the end of our time period. I'm not sure if we're going to be cut off. It's 5 o'clock, but I did want to just bring up one last question that Deborah actually has for Stuart, relating to the digital modeling of data in the Narragansett Bay, and she wanted to know if there's any possibility that the same science and methods that you're using on the water could be applied to the human body in water, or I imagine elsewhere. You know, is there a way we can document our body's responses in the same way that you're documenting the bay's responses? And maybe that's a
No, that's such a cool question.
Sorry, go ahead. The reason why I asked that is because I have a cousin who used to swim from Weechamoicha Riverside to Providence every morning, and she did that for 20 years. And I was just wondering if we documented, you know, if we documented before, like 20 years ago, before she went in, then 20 years after, along with the science that you're doing. To me, that would be some interesting. The results would be interesting.
Yeah, this is amazing. But it also kind of makes me think a little bit about how we've a couple of our conversations too have drifted into questions about scale. Right, there's someone throwing some trash onto the ground right there immediately, but then the scale when we come to billions of gallons worth of pollution dumping into the bay, we're talking about the bay as this enormous body of water, and ourselves as containers for water. And we can see the same kind of these fluid dynamics represented in both things, and they're both incredibly complex systems. So yes, absolutely. I'm sure there's applications that can exist there, but I think we'd be startled by the similarities. And trying to think about, when we're thinking about visualizations that can encompass this kind of scale, I think that's the true challenge for us and for future designers and future artists, to think about how to build really robust, beautiful visualizations that can be this encompassing, and sometimes to be this encompassing, they have to be this open. right? They have to be open for different kinds of reads and different kinds of applications and approaches.
It's just so interesting that we're made up of so much water, and you know, the chemistry that we have, how it relates to the chemistry to the ocean. That would be an interesting scientific project that I would like to have like students go over because it seems really like it could last forever. It's very there's a lot to it.
Yeah,
it makes me think a little bit about when we saw some samples in Jen's talk of Kevin's project where he's modeling out microplastics where they drift. And when we were working on another one of his pieces, we could see when they hit more open bodies of water in the ocean, and they all start to do the exact same thing. They make this really specific kind of spiral. And it's a well-known spiral if you're a fluid dynamics person. And I was asking him, what is this spiral? What is the circle? And he goes, it's the Earth. This is like the slight axis of the Earth rotating. This is just what happens at us. You need a certain amount of water, and then you can just see, like, if you see an object there, these slow circles, these slow spirals. And then that's just totally mind-blowing. It's the best part about this kind of work, is that you get someone mention something like that really casually in a conversation, and then you had to go pick your brain up off the floor, you know. Yeah, so that was a great question. And
I wanted to let you know my native name is Talking Water.
Fantastic. Perfect. Well, this has been fantastic. I think we're going to wrap things up. And, you know, we chose this title, Stories of the Bay, because it was just so clear about how that's the thread that connected design. And Jen, I really loved how you connected stories to placemaking, because the definition of places that I've heard, as different from spaces, is places are spaces with meaning. And the use of stories to imbue that meaning, to communicate that meaning, to remember that meaning, I think is really powerful. So, you know, the trip I've heard a recent trick to memorization is to, if you really want to remember something, explain it to somebody else. So maybe what you can do tonight after this panel is go tell some of these stories that you just heard to somebody else, and they'll stay with you a lot longer. I think they're all really important and really fascinating. I hope we all stay in touch. Maybe we'll do a redo or a reunion sometime in person when we can all be together. I really want to thank our audience for sticking with us. And again, really thankful for the Rhode Island Council on the Humanities, as well as the City of Providence's Department of Art, Culture, and Tourism. Also the CIC here at the Wexford Center. It's beautiful. I realized that you could either see the river or me or not both, and we'd all rather see the river. So with that, again, thank you to all our panelists and hosts. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your stories, and have a good night.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks all. That was great.
Out.